forensic science. Finally, the book offers some specific suggestions on how to deal with these problems. But it also argues that real reform must come from an increased recognition by everyday people that our system of justice is broken and needs to be fixed. 1. The scourge of mass incarceration. For too long, too many judges have been too quiet about an evil of which we are a part, the mass incarceration of people in the United States. It is time for more of us to speak out. The basic facts are not in dispute. As of 2019, more than 2.2 million people were incarcerated in U.S. jails and prisons, a 500% increase over the past 40 years. Although the United States accounts for about 5% of the world's population, it houses nearly 25% of the world's prison population. The per capita incarceration rate in the United States is about 1.5 times that of second-place El Salvador and third-place Turkmenistan, and more than 6 times the rate of neighboring Canada. Another 4.75 million Americans are subject to state supervision imposed by probation or parole. Much of the increase in imprisonment has been for nonviolent offenses ranging from drug possession to property theft. And even though the crime rates in the United States have mostly declined since the early 1990s, the number of incarcerated persons has either risen or remained at levels above 2 million, partly because more people are being sent to prison for offenses that were once punished with other measures, but also because the sentences are longer. For example, even though the number of violent crimes has materially decreased over the past 2 decades, the number of prisoners serving life sentences has steadily increased, so that 1 in 9 persons in prison is now serving a life sentence. In addition, at least 500,000 of the 2.2 million persons now incarcerated have not been convicted of any crime, but are simply there because, having been arrested, they could not make bail. And whom are we locking up? Mostly young men of color. Over 840,000, or nearly 40% of the 2.2 million U.S. prisoners, are African American males. Put another way, about 1 in 9 African American males between the ages of 20 and 34 is now in prison, with at least an equal number subject to probationary supervision. If current rates hold, 1/3 of all black men will be imprisoned at some point in their lifetimes. Another approximately 440,000, or 20% of the 2.2 million U.S. prisoners, are young Hispanic males. This mass incarceration, which also includes about 800,000 white and Asian males, as well as over 100,000 women, most of whom committed nonviolent offenses, is the product of statutes that were enacted beginning in the 1970s, with the twin purposes of lowering crime rates in general and deterring the drug trade in particular. These laws imposed mandatory minimum terms of imprisonment on many first offenders. They denied bail to many persons arrested on minor charges that were eventually dropped. They propounded sentencing guidelines that initially mandated, and still recommend, very substantial prison terms for many, if not most, offenders. And they required lifetime imprisonment for many recidivists. These laws also substantially deprived judges of sentencing discretion and effectively guaranteed imprisonment for many offenders who would have previously received probation or deferred prosecution, or who would have been sent to drug treatment or mental health programs rather than prison. The unavoidable question is whether these laws have succeeded in reducing crime. Certainly, crime rates have come down substantially from the very high levels of the 1970s and 1980s. Overall, crime rates have been cut nearly in half since they reached their peak in 1991, and even taking into account the unusual spike in shootings in some cities that accompanied the stresses of the COVID-19 pandemic, crime rates in general are now at levels not seen in many decades. A simple but powerful argument can be made that by locking up for extended periods the people who are most likely to commit crimes, we have both incapacitated those who would otherwise be recidivists and deterred still others from committing crimes in the first place. But is this true? The honest answer is that we don't know. And it is this uncertainty that makes changing the status quo so difficult. Why tamper, the argument goes, with what seems to be working unless we know that it isn't working?